What's
Yeah.
your angle? I'll buy that. Those are
I
the
do
three
have
questions we have.
that's true.
That's
And,
a
you know,
Flintstones
you
reference.
keep talking about value stream networks
Yeah.
and as a Mick Kirsten thing.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting is I just had to do the Scrum at Scale reauthorization because, you know, it's that time of year.
That's right.
But it forced me to read the Scrum at Scale guide just for fun. And
As you do.
as you will, just to make sure, you know, you're to catch it. And there's a bunch of stuff in there about team networks.
Do go on.
Oh, there is. It's when it talks about it's a bunch of stuff being in a 14-page or a 20-page document. It's not a lot of stuff. But when they're talking about organizational design, they're actually talking about where the EMS or where the EAT and EMS sit in you know, in a hierarchy, and then you know, if you had, and it's actually mentioning, oh, and here's a structure that is common with customer relation teams, legal and compliance teams, and people operations HR teams, where they would sit in a theoretical layout. It's just they give a couple theoretical layouts.
I can't remember. Are they assuming one EAT per org? We are descending into jargon. Oh yes, one EAT per org is the last question I remember.
Yes. Well, and the way that it's built, if you know, it's meant for linear scaling. So one EAT per major transformational entity.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think
So
it's
you
one.
could, yeah.
If you
So
were
you
in
could
a
have multiple
gigantic organization, yes.
Yeah,
exactly.
you could have multiple EATs but there's nothing in the framework above an EAT. So there's not an EAT of EATs.
Right. No, your
weird.
executives are coming to an EAT, but if they're in a big enough organ, they might have to eat several times.
Yeah, but being that an EAT is an extension or an expansion of the Scrum Master loop,
yes,
they would become. I think if there was a layer above the highest level of EAT that you had, say you had multiple divisions and every division had their own EAT, and eventually somebody got the bright idea to bring these players to the same table, then you would form an EAT at that level, and these things would then become just part of the Scrum of Scrums pantheon.
But this completes my question about the pattern. Essentially, it's fractal. It's just like team and team of teams. It's another extension of that.
Yes.
And it scales horizontally to fit whatever organizational size and governance you need.
Theoretically.
And so, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Because essentially in my mind, it was like, okay, we don't have a single, like one value stream. And then one thing, you have multiple of these that need its own governance. You have a lot of options in terms of how you divide that up logically based on business domain.
With very little in the way of guidance as to what they actually do, other than to say they do something. They act as Scrum teams and they have stuff to do, and that stuff is the transformation backlog. Right? It's primarily the transformation backlog, but it's also organizational impediment removal and things like that. So it's
caring for the system, managing the system.
Yes. And they you know, sometimes they call it the Agile operating system, sometimes they call it the Agile practice, but it's fun.
What do you think the chances are, sort of to extend this whole discussion we've had about the market for Agile and people, you know, in 1980, right? If you're looking for an office job, you might market yourself as somebody with computer skills, right?
Okay.
Because it wasn't a thing 10 years earlier, or 1990, right? You might be a digital office worker. Is that where Agile's going? Like nowadays, you don't look for resumes of people who have computer experience. Everybody has computer experience. It's table stakes.
Right.
In a couple of years, is it going to be like Agile's? It's like going to be looking for somebody who can run a spreadsheet or can boot up a computer.
I kind of think so. It's
almost
almost hopefully it's become or will become part of the fabric of what's expected. So you don't you don't pass go if you don't have any familiarity with any agile concepts or anything like that. So, or
Yeah.
you'll have to you'll be expected to learn those fairly early on.
So is there an analog? Was there a point at which you needed to have a strong project manager bent or a strong understanding of SDLC project management to get a job in the
I
past
think,
before
yeah, I think
Agile?
in the 90s, I think in the early
Okay.
90s, you did, or that was
So
a
you could,
strong, yeah.
yeah, so you could argue that you could you could say, well, if Agile becomes the preferred operating model, then having experience in Agile ways of working would become table stakes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I wonder. I mean, I still think so. Going back to Mick Kirsten, right? His whole framing of project versus product.
Mm-hmm.
I don't hear him saying that projects are going away necessarily. Like you still will need project management. So, and I don't know if it's safe to think not everything's going to become agile. So I'm just thinking how it's going to. I think we're going to have a situation
Well,
where you understand that based on the type of work, these are the two different. But I don't know if we're going to think of the for high uncertainty, high risk, right? Is that going to be an agile approach, or is it just going to be focused, iterative, quick feedback?
well, I would so back up. You just said, you're not going to use Agile for everything, and I want to clarify something. When you say that, do you mean you're not going to use something like Scrum for everything? Because Agile is just being responsive to things you observe.
Yeah.
It's being willing to change course as new information becomes available.
Because you don't have the information you need to make the plan up front. So all I'm saying is
Yeah.
if you can plan the work out, plan the work and work the plan, then maybe that's a lower overhead way of doing it with traditional project management. And so what I'm looking at is from the highest level is at an organization. Like if you've got low uncertainty and low risk and you can plan the stuff and just not just work the plan. What I'm saying is you'll need project management and you'll probably need product management, because based on the types of problems Jeff is delighted.
Jeff, I really want you to take this.
So you're making a presumption here, and I understand why. When you say low uncertainty, there's this presumption. Even previous, in the 80s, there was always a presumption. Well, we're certain this is what we want to do, and it turned out, no, you're not quite certain. Well, they gave us the requirements. They were written down, so we're certain. No, actually, you're not, because what the users wanted was not really accurately captured without the conversation, right? That was the whole thing. Yeah, we just throw the requirements over the wall. They're written, they're very clear. No. And yet we would deliver systems that consistently miss the mark. Why? And so all the principles and practices, and just even the values for that matter, of what we call agile, I don't care what you label it, those principles and values are, this is a better way to do it than assuming, oh, well, we're certain. Hey, how about we have a conversation about it? So I think it's not a matter of, oh, we're adapting a particular discipline, Scrum or Kanban or whatever it happens to be. It's more at a macro level. How do we think? How do we work differently? And do we actually have conversations about what is expected? We have constant conversations about what is expected. You don't have to get tied up in all the jargon, sprints and Scrum and blah blah blah.
Yeah.
Absent
That's not Agile, right? It's trappings of agility. It's things that happen in an Agile space, but that isn't what Agile is. And I think the Cynefin framework gives you this caution that if you think you're in the simple space and you keep treating everything like it's a known, and you understand it like this, you run the risk of running into complacency and falling over the chaos wall, right? You just you aren't equipped to handle disruption if you completely believe that you are always in the simple space. And so then you basically devolve instantly into chaos, because that's the only way that you can take charge of the situation and deal with the unknown.
It sounds like you're saying we won't have project management because there won't be any simple work, or
define project management.
Yes.
Being able to define what you'll need to do in what order before you start the work. So
a project in project management terminology is an initiative or some endeavor that is temporary in nature and has a defined beginning and a defined end. There's nothing that says that you cannot have a project, defined beginning and a defined end, and still you can still conduct the progression of that project in an agile manner. There's nothing, they're not diametrically opposed. You can have a product mindset where, yes, we're going to build this and we're going to maintain it over a period of time. And yes, that's fine. But that doesn't say everything has to be a product. You will still have projects that are going to be temporary in nature, be they a year or whatever. And you can also break them down and work them in a very agile manner. And whether you're following Kanban, Scrum, Scrumban, whatever, XP, you can still incorporate XP practices in a project that is of a very temporary nature. Can you not?
Yeah, I guess maybe what I'm stuck on is the idea of, are you defining the tasks in your project plan, or are you defining the valuable problems to solve? And so I guess what I hear you saying is that we will always have problems to solve. That's how we would work the breakdown structure. Right. And always be adaptive and iterative. So we're sort of collapsing together.
And I mean, the concept of you'll need project managers. If you really have to be aware of which aspect of project management you're referring to. If you're saying you always need somebody who's aware of budgetary expenses, because that falls to project management, it's very different from saying you need somebody to track the progress of individual tasks to individuals for fixed periods of time. They're very different aspects of the project management thing. And a lot of that budgetary concern is coming from the old guard way we do budgeting. It's still putting pressure on the organization to manage the budget that way, because that's how it was doled out. So
are we saying that all work should be owned by a product owner, and that they'd own the budget, and that we should run everything in an iterative manner?
I never say all anything.
I was just
I know it's risky.
You said
risky.
always.
It's
I mean, that's an automatic no. I mean, you take it's always.
Are we saying that 99% of the time?
That's still a lot.
Okay. So then, in 1% of the time, at least, we don't need to have product owners.
Okay, so we
got some other approach.
So we jumped on your statement about project management, and you could have predicted that was going to happen. But what's your point? Like, why are you going down this path? What's important to you?
I'm just curious, as organizations go through a transformation or whatever we call it next year, do they need to think about the types of work and bring different types of approaches to the work? Do we need to maintain this distinction in our heads of project management versus product management? Or is it going to collapse into one thing? Or
the first half of your statement, yes. The second half, no. Yes, they need to look at the types of work and assign and track it as appropriate to the type of work. If you have super simple things and they're small and they don't carry great risk if they explode on you, then manage them in a super simple way. If you have a complicated thing, but you've done it a million times and you understand it's a well-worn path and you can predict how long it's going to take, and all you're managing is the risks that might get in the way, rarely, sure, you could do things in a traditional waterfall way. But if you're dealing with any amount of uncertainty or complexity or any of that stuff, agile ways of working, and I'm not even picking one of them, have a better track record of managing the risk and managing the progression of those things. So an organization should, in all aspects, take the right type of or solution to the right type of problem, right? They shouldn't just be blindly going, we smack everything with a scrum stick. We only do Kanban. We only do waterfall, right?
Yep.
Absolutes are generally troublesome.
All generalizations are dumb.
And as consultants, you know, the it depends is never more meaningful than in this moment, right? So the second half of your statement, though, was products versus projects, and I don't think you necessarily need to. I don't think you draw the same distinction, right? Just because you have a complicated problem you can run in a waterfall way doesn't mean you need project management. You could do that still following the same patterns. You can still work in backlogs, right? A waterfall project, if you look at the macro view of it, it's a pile of stuff you need to get done. You make a plan to do the stuff, you track the progress, and then you deliver it, right? And that's a waterfall project. A Scrum sprint is you have a smaller pile of stuff to do, you make a plan for delivering it, you deliver it, and you work it and you deliver it, right? You're just doing it in tighter increments. It's the feedback loops that Agile brings to the table in shorter cycles that brings the value. Waterfall just made one really big cycle and assumed they could get it right. And that's the part that we had trouble with. But I used to get a lot of traction out of talking with traditional project managers and say, what if we divided your project in two? We did a first half and a second half. What might you gain by going on that route? And then once we play that exercise, then now divide it in four. Now divide it in, or in thirds, then do quarters, and you're getting it down into smaller and smaller increments to the point where they start going, well, yeah, I guess I could make some progress in a month or two.
Right.
Like, okay. So all I'm saying is take that same process we just went through and now scale it down to a week or 2 weeks.
Yeah, I guess in my head there was some value in making the distinction of what's in the backlog, right? Is it tasks that need to be done that you know what they are already, or are they valuable problems? I saw that as part of the essential distinction there. And I guess what you're saying is that they're always going to be valuable problems because we're not exactly sure what those solutions are going to be. That's an assumption that whether it's a project or a product, we don't know exactly what we're going to deliver. And so we're capturing the problems to be solved. And then we have a continuous feedback loop the whole way. So we really are sort of moving away from the assumption is you can't make a list of tasks. You can't plan the work and work the plan. Like that's not a thing we really do anymore.
It's not well, go on, Jeff. I ranted a while. You can rant.
No, I'm thinking, when you think of whether it's an ERP or a PLM, a product lifecycle management system, or something like that, something large and monolithic that typically, a vendor will supply and you're implementing it. And the notion is, oh, well, it's going to take a year to implement that. In a typical project management realm, I should say in the traditional project management realm. It's, oh, okay, we'll start this in January, and then come December, we'll be able to roll this out. And the notion that, well, we're going to have all these components, but the reality is the bill of material component delivers value. The approved manufacturers list, that delivers value. And so all these different components can be, if you broke that down, you could still implement that. Well, the vendor says, well, the vendor is going to tell you what they're going to tell you. The reality is you can implement almost all of this stuff in a smaller incremental cycle. So first we're going to do the approved manufacturers list. Then we're going to do the bill of material. Or in an ERP situation, okay, we're going to do AP. Okay, then we're going to do GL, or whatever order you choose to do that. You're breaking a large system down into just smaller points of value, though. And so instead of saying, well, we're going to do this, all at the task level, you're still breaking it into smaller bite-sized chunks that deliver value.
We need a bill of materials so that we can understand what we're buying and the reason why everything's on the list and there's nothing superfluous. Yeah.
And is this a well-worn path of something that we've done before, or is this something that there's some level of uncertainty and creativity in? And if it's something that's well-worn that we've done before, then it's kind of a drop in, we get it done, right? We don't have to fret over it as much.
But it's still a situation where the acceptance criteria are clear to everyone, and there's not likely to be a lot of discussion around it because we've done it a dozen times.
Right.
But we're still capturing it as acceptance criteria instead of you will do this.
So let me challenge you then. So a vendor, let's say, any of the large ERP or PLM vendors can say, well, this is customer, this is what our package does. And you say, yeah, that's good. That handles most of it. But every customer is a little bit different. And smart customers will say, well, I'm not just going to take that out of the box. What applies appropriately in our situation? And so there's going to be a level of tweaking and, I don't know, I say customization that has to happen to make it work well in that customer's environment. And so to say, well, we're certain.
So then what you're buying then is not TLS encryption. It is security of your data going back and forth based on certain standards. See what I'm getting at, right?
Okay.
Maybe the vendor says we will implement security through TLS, and the smart customer pushes back and says, well, maybe we'd rather use something else. So we're not gonna define it as TLS. We're gonna define it as secure data connection
as the outcome that we're achieving.
The outcome is yes,
right, not the means by which we achieve it.
Okay. Yeah, the reason I harp on this and I get stuck on this because those are two very different ways of approaching the work, right? Give us TLS or give us security.
But even if you did go down the first route and you said give us TLS, because we've already we've got an architectural team who has determined that TLS is the thing that we're going to use to safeguard our data in our environment. So give us a TLS solution. Right.
Yes, you will have to eventually.
There's nothing inherently wrong with that.
Right? No, in fact, you have to do that, right? Yeah. But I think the way you get there matters. Like if you first define data security and then say, based on our enterprise architecture standards, data security to us means TLS, right? As a secondary, as an implementation, as opposed to defining the work conversation.
Yeah.
Anyway,
but I don't think the TLS part is the interesting part of the problem. The interesting part of the problem is what you're doing with it. Like what are you putting through the pipeline once you've established?
Maybe TLS is overkill, right? But
no, and not even that. Just fine, TLS is there, but what are we doing? What else are we doing with it? Like what other problems are we solving that is the vehicle for the solution?
Why is it the most valuable way to go? Yeah.
To use your reference to TLS, does the average customer even know, or are they even aware of TLS?
Probably not.
The answer is right. Exactly. Probably not. And so I think what Mike is saying then is TLS in furtherance of what? A better security. Okay. In furtherance of what? So there's something that is of value to the customer, whoever that customer may be. And there are going to be components, and security is one of those things that there are lots of components of security that should be transparent to the user.
Yeah.
But they're still of value because they're necessary in this environment, right?
Yes. So what that means is you need somebody who is managing that user need and the discussion around the trade-off of value to say security. What security means in this situation is this. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, I'm glad we solved that.
So did you need a project manager for that?
Well, I had to keep the value in. So then I guess the next question is, do people need to be in the office to have these conversations? Directly, face to face, or could they be remote? Or
Is this some
what if
vaguely veiled attempt to come back to the topic that you thought we might talk about today?
it's not veiled at all? I'm going to unveil it. So we were talking about there's a I don't know. Do you guys want to get into this now? This is a good time?
May as well.
There's a video that Marcelo, I think, had. I don't know if it was Marcelo who put it out, but yeah, a video. I'm going to use the word encouraging. Yeah.
Is it okay?
Oh, no,
to say?
I don't know if it's okay to name this.
Okay. Okay.
There is a company.
It's a web-based company.
Yes, in the medical field.
Okay, and we'll leave it at that.
We can bleep that out if we need to. It's not going to be hard to figure out who it is. Anyway, they want people to come back to the office, and they made a video encouraging people to come back to the office, except it didn't feel like encouragement. It felt like, in fact,
they actually said in the video, it's not a negotiation. This is not the start of a negotiation. This is
we are informing you.
This is informing you of our decision.
Right. It's not a suggestion. It's like I say to my dogs, this is a command.
You will be returning to the office.
Or else. They didn't say the or else, but it was strongly implied that get back in the office.
The more EQ-minded people saw it as a veiled threat.
Yeah, I would definitely have thoughts if I was reporting into this organization. What I thought was funny, and then they had shots of the leaders who were apparently speaking to you from the office, but it kind of looked like it was a green screen and they weren't really in the office. In a video message that says "Come back here," they weren't there. Did you guys get that sense? Which it just makes it funnier. The only reason I put it out is because I thought it was hilarious. If that's true,
I have seen people, they put a fake background behind them, even if they're in the office. It's just they're hiding the stuff behind them.
I just thought the potential of a VP doing a message from his home office saying "Get back to the central office," and he wasn't there.
That would add a level of irony, yes,
okay,
to the whole proceedings. So, how do you want to pursue this? We've got. Are we saying we want to talk about that particular instance? Or we want to talk about the concept in general.
I think we can talk about the concept. I thought it would be fun to play devil's advocate, right? And you guys could react to it maybe. Because we want to have to really explore it. Maybe we want an adversarial process like we do in the legal system.
All right, you're wrong.
Okay, so
done.
I want to ask for the judge. Isn't there value in having people all in the office? Why isn't this a good thing? Shouldn't the leadership want people to? Because in Agile, we've got a principle that says the most effective way of communicating in a team is in direct face-to-face communication.
Yes, exactly. Right. Like we're not doing right now.
Well, are we? Are we not?
I see your face.
Are you not entertained?
I can read your lips.
Exactly. Like what extra value would you have if we were sitting across the table from each other than when the call was over, we could go to lunch? So that.
Is there no value in going to lunch?
There's no value in it, but what is the value proposition for being remote? They've opened up the possibility of expanding their employment base. They're not limited by geography,
Sure.
right? So they could get people from anywhere.
Yeah,
That's
the
one.
value. Okay, well, that's a value of a different strategy than they've decided to pursue. But there's value in the strategy that they did decide. Like if they want to play the other side of that trade-off and say, we only want people who are around St. Louis. We're making that trade-off explicitly. We just think, Markey, there's a ineffable magic that happens when people come together and breathe the same air and whiteboard on the same physical assets. And it provides this synergy. I'm not doing a very good devil's advocate.
Well, no, there
I'm
was the
mocking it.
problem was the breathe the same air concept. It's just, especially for a medical company, that just the concept that breathing the same air has now created a knee-jerk gut response.
Let's assume a non-pandemic context. Let's
Okay.
assume the air's clean and not trying to kill you.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So is there no, okay. So what we're saying is that the value in that approach, the strength of that argument is relatively weak compared to the value in being able to know.
Well, I mean,
I don't think it's weak.
Yeah.
I think it depends. There are certain circumstances that you got to have people in the office. I mean, you're not going to do telehealth exclusively. You got to see your doctor at some point.
In person.
Right. Manufacturing facilities, you're not going to do that remotely. That just does not work. Retail, same thing. I mean, well, maybe not so much with Amazon and everything. But my point is, to try to stamp that for every single organization, it doesn't necessarily hold water. Oh yeah, well, we can all work from home. No, that's not really the case. But keep in mind, the same folks right now, and we'll use this organization as an example, they're the ones that have probably pursued having, I don't know, remote workers, people in offshore locations. So we, remember, for many years have advocated face-to-face, and many times that was very
and
frequently
co-location.
exactly. And they were like, well, we can save money by offshoring a lot of this. Oh, okay, if you want to play that game, that's fine. So now what you're saying is, but we want everybody back in the office too. So
except
what does that
the
mean?
Remote people, and that's
Except
the
for
problem.
The remote people, exactly.
Right. And that's the problem is, and we've talked about this, you can, if you have even one person not present, right, you may as well all be not present, because in order to get that person into the mix, everybody has to go into a screen, or everybody has to go into a record, an isolation thing. Even if we were sitting around the same table, but we had to deal with Marcelo calling in, right? We would all have to go to an online thing or deal with some speakerphone system that would degrade the communication of the recording concept, right? One way or another, we're going to pay a price for having that remote team member, right?
Yeah.
So I think the problem is these organizations don't have co-located resources. Even if they made everyone come into the office, they would still have people who were out of the loop. And the thing that is almost tragic is when they come back into the office, they force them back into the office and they spend their whole day at their desk with a headset on talking to a screen, which they could just as easily have done from home and just as effectively done from home. There's no, that serendipity we talk about, or those moments of people encountering each other in the hall are less. Yeah, they're not happening because you're not walking to get to a meeting.
Yeah. So is the way to think about it, should it be a binary thing? Everybody's in person or everybody is remote, but no in between. Hybrid is really to be avoided.
And everybody has an opinion on this, I'm sure. I think it has more to do with intent. What is the intent? If there's genuine intent to be more collaborative, I've mentioned this before. There's um, a big box retailer that they design their space in order to facilitate better collaboration, and so there was very minimal offshore stuff. In fact,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not even sure I ever spoke to anybody that was offshore there, even during the pandemic. And the expectation was always that everybody will come back to the office. Now, has that happened? I don't know. I haven't talked to them recently, but their intent was to provide a space for people to work collaboratively, and they did not pursue, we're going to offshore all the development and everything like that. It wasn't like that. And so if you want, if your intent as an organization is to get people back to collaboration, okay, good. Then I would also expect to see other behaviors and structures that bring that collaboration back. But if your intent is really, hey, you know what, we got this lease and we got to cover it, that's disingenuous, and that's, I would say, is a little different situation.
So, would another way to say this? Are we saying that the problem with the video is that they were not, they didn't frame it as from the point of view of intent? What problem are we intending to solve? They were focused on the implementation or the task. Just get back into the office, like, and
They
not.
tried.
Yeah,
They
they tried.
tried.
They actually said, "Oh, and
Mm-hmm,
you know,
mm-hmm,
we acknowledge that when we're together, we do better." I mean,
mm-hmm,
they come
mm-hmm,
out and there was a lot of platitudes along those front, and then they may
Yeah.
that may be true, right?
mm-hmm.
That's why we were always pushing co-location and collaboration, because of the benefits that you got out of it. But then you get the introverts in the room who go, I'm not comfortable doing this. I spend the whole day freaking out, and I go home and I'm exhausted, and it's not good quality of life for me. And they're not wrong. That is something that is happening to them. It's a reality that we needed to make accommodation for them in some way, but we still had to bring them into the collaborative loop. But now the other side, it's the pendulum swung the other way. Now the introverts are winning, and the extroverts are all going, I want people again, please, for the love of God, let me breathe the same air as you. So I think that maybe what we're looking at is an overcorrection in the other direction. And now they're trying to bring it back to something in the middle. And the trouble is that not everyone's going to be happy with either extreme, and the middle's not so great either. So,
I did hear a suggestion, and I'm not going to say that this is the case in every situation, but there was an implication recently that someone made that this return to office in some cases may also be a veiled way to lay off people. So return to the office, or you're gone. Well, instead of saying, oh, we're going to have a layoff, we don't have to do that. All we have to do is say return to the office or else. And people are like, well, I'm not returning to the
and
office.
people are
Okay,
going to
well, bye-bye.
self-select out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, I hate to
Yeah.
think that that's a rather subversive way to go about it, but maybe not beyond the realm of possibility for
I
some
think that's
organizations.
definitely happened recently. Yeah. There have been places that have said we are refocusing and we're now in person, and that because I think the way maybe it was framed in some cases where we need people who are really want to be obsessive about work. We're working on really hard stuff. And if you don't want to work in person, like if that's not where your head is at in terms of what you want your work experience to be, working as hard as possible in person, then this just isn't this is not the organization for you anymore. I think that's actually definitely for sure happened.
Mm-hmm.
And are we
Yeah.
saying that that is a bad thing necessarily?
Well, and we're not saying that that's the justification that
Right.
Yeah.
No.
right.
Yeah.
I would hate to think that anybody is actually engaged in that kind of thinking, but it's, it's possible. Anything's possible. So, but to your point, I think I have my own biases. I actually prefer being in an office with other people, but Mike and I have both been in situations where, yeah, we were in the office together, but everybody's got their headphones on and nobody's talking and collaborating anyway. And so it was kind of bizarre, anyhow,
Yeah.
because you're in this big open office environment and you couldn't even focus.
Yeah.
So the infrastructure was not structured in a way to really promote good collaboration. Um,
Yeah.
if you're just coming into the office, to Mike's point, and everybody's wearing headphones or earbuds or whatever, that defeats the purpose. You're not
Yep.
collaborating. You're.
Right. But most organizations haven't invested in the collaboration spaces, the pods or whatever structure they laid out, where they had work clusters where there was a meeting space, and there was a whiteboard space, and there was the places where you could, the study carrels where you could go for some isolation when you needed it, or pairing station, or just like there was for a little while a really good science in creating these collaboration spaces. The problem was they took a lot of square footage, and that translated into
Yeah.
that it wasn't
Cost.
on the face as cost effective as cubicles, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um
Yeah. I mean, I wonder, to pick up on Jeff's point, I wonder if we need the intent. Like, why are we doing this, right? To have
Mm-hmm.
more effective collaboration. Then we need to measure the outcome. Like, or did we actually do that, or did we end up with people in the same space with headphones on?
yeah.
And then, because
What
that
do
could drive your trade-off discussion about, do we invest in a collaboration space with a bunch of whiteboards? Like, is the value that we create as a result of that more than we would have saved by not doing it? Like,
yeah. Well, how do
till you
you
have all those parts there, you can't have that conversation.
when the great time to build the collaboration space is when no one's there. So like have them all be at home, then reconfigure the space, and then bring the people back into the space.
Hold on, you wouldn't do that iteratively and incrementally to make sure that it was working?
Well, do one at a time. Send everyone in this region to
Ver-
depart this place onto another place. Have another. We were at one place where they had whole buildings, and they would renovate the floor of a building, and everyone would be away from that, and then they would repopulate that space.
So do vertical slices of your physical space
Yeah,
reorganization.
and starting with, let's set up a couple
Yeah.
prototypes and see how they work, and measure the outcomes from it. I mean, even in Scrum and Scale, they talk about the same thing as your reference group, like
Mm-hmm.
the prototype group that you're going to base everything else off of, or scale everything else from.
Oh, your basic pattern, your fractal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what would a collaboration space look like? What would an ideal how much individuality do you give a team to structure
Right.
that? Like, what, is it rolling whiteboards that can enable that? Is it the ability to slide desks around, rolling chairs, or is it fixed wall units? Like, how do you do that? It would kind of be neat if you had a team and you were said, okay, this blank void is your workspace. Design a playground that will work for you, or a work ground that will work for you.
Mm.
Right.
Yeah.
And do it in such a way that, yes, we brought in the big table, the big conferencey table, and then we use that for a while, and then we're saying, oh, we really need to reconfigure this, and then have the freedom and the materials that you can just swap that stuff out. Like when we were in a space where we would build conference tables out of long 6-foot tables, those things.
Mm-hmm.
Like we'd put 4 of them together, and that was a conference table. And then
Oh, right.
we'd say, oh, we need work, and we'd separate them into 2 groups, and then and that configured. And it's a lot of stackable rolling chairs. But
Cool. All right. Well, we're coming up on our time box here. Any last thoughts? before we have to leave?
The one last thing, and it has to do with measurement. And so if you're going to measure value or productivity or whatever it is, I think there's this temptation to run into, I'll call it just junk math, junk science.
Hmm.
To reference that video, I listened to it several times, and one of the things they said, well, what we found was that working in person yielded better revenue, better this, better productivity. And I'm not saying that it was incorrect, but I'm not sure they measured that scientifically.
You want to
So
see the data?
it's like,
or the
okay,
methods?
maybe you did have better revenue, but who knows? There are so many different factors that go into that. How I'm guessing they did not specifically set out
to
have a
experiment on
pandemic.
that one
Exactly,
particular. You're right.
exactly.
Yeah. Did our profits fall because our client base changed, our situation changed, the pandemic changed the way people shopped or bought our service? Is there a 1-for-1 relationship there? Yeah, you're playing with too many variables, and you're not being very scientific about your choice of metrics and whatever.
Yeah, how would you even set up a valid scientific test for that? I guess that would be a whole discussion to get into to make sure it's valid. That's your point, Jeff.
It would be.
Yeah.
And so what I think we're saying is it's a good bet they didn't set those up.
Right. But so you're saying that probably the motivation is we paid for this office space. We need to be able to say we're using it. And that's
in some
really where
cases,
this
I
comes
think
from.
that's the case.
And so, there's a mercenary part of me that keeps saying, okay, so pay the rent on the space. You have that many people, maintain the space for those people to use. If they happen to use it, fine. If they happen to be doing it from home, what's the difference?
It might be less destructive to your actual output of value if you just maintained the least you can't get out of and paid it, but didn't, like, assuming that there's a hit to productivity by forcing people to come in for false reasons.
Yeah. I mean, you're going to get suddenly, it wasn't fun. As much as I enjoyed being in the collaborative spaces, and it wasn't fun to sit in traffic for an hour each way.
There's
Right.
definitely trade-offs on both sides. Yes.
And
yes.
And whatever quality of life issues that came in that, or even taking the train and breathing diesel fumes for an hour and a half.
Yeah.
Exactly. And whatever else is floating around. So
yeah, totally. May or may not be this year. Okay, well, it feels like this has been an Agile thing. It might have been two Agile things.
It might have been two. This has been an Agile thing.
Yeah,
and the other thing was also an Agile thing. So here's an Agile thing, and there was an Agile thing.
In both cases, I was Matt Beam.
And I was Mike Markey.
And I'm still Jeff Singleton.
And we'll see you next times.
Right.
Goodbye. Here. Thanks for all the fish.
All right.
So long.